Hello, everybody, and thank you for tuning in to the Liberty Report. With me today is Daniel McAdams. Daniel, good to see you.
How are you, Dr. Paul?
I'm doing fine. I thought we'd talk a little bit about Africa. We travel around the world quite frequently, but there's a little bit of stirring there. It might surprise some of our viewers. It would certainly surprise the average American on the street about what's going on. But there was just a few days ago, there was a bombing in Somalia, in Mogadishu, and it was supposed to possibly be related to a bombing and a killing that happened last August that we were involved in. So we're involved in a civil war there. And this might have been a retaliation against the government for the people that were killed back in August. I think 10 people were killed and some children were killed, and they were supposed to be the really bad guys. But turns out probably not, you know, because there's been talk of monetary compensation and all. But we were involved. We were part of the raid, and it was the Somalia government that was involved in. But it goes to show how one thing leads to another, and in a way this could be an intended consequence that they didn't want, unintended consequence, but it also could be a blowback effort to pay back and to pay back to the government for this killing. So this goes to show that we are, you know, very much involved in Africa. And I was just wondering, you know, how many countries are we in Africa? We have an Africa Command now, which is not that long ago that we established the command. But I have a map that I want to show, and I think it's an incomplete map. I think there are more countries than this because it doesn't even put some Libya in it. But the blue, the dark blue, shows where we are, that we admit to being there, and who knows where our CIA agents are and special forces, but we're involved there. And of course, this shows that we're significantly involved, and we're involved in civil wars. And of course, I think what we want to touch on today is the policy. You know, does Trump know about this? Is this a change in policy? And he doesn't like the terrorists. We should go after them wherever they are. But the military has a lot of discretion, and local people do things that we don't always want them to do. So it's a messy situation, but it shows how it can escalate. And I think that's part of what is happening here. This bombing just recently that killed 300 most likely was a retaliation against something we were involved in August. And it just means that another good reason why, what are we doing there? What is the purpose? What are we accomplishing? But of course, the neocons always have a justification for being there.
Yeah, and they say that we're there because we're fighting the war on terror. You know, that's why we've been there. But the original attack was U.S. Special Forces along with Somali forces, and it was in a village called Barire, and apparently at least 10 civilians were killed, including a lot of children. And here's what we know about the attack on Saturday, which was a horrible car bomb. It killed 300 people, but the bomber was a former military guy. Barire was his hometown, apparently, according to press reports. So obviously he was motivated by a U.S.-led attack on his hometown, so 300 were killed. The target was the airport compound, and that's the part of Mogadishu where the UN headquarters, the embassies, and the 22,000 troops, the Africa Peacekeeping Force is involved. So those were the intended targets. There was a mix-up in how they were going to get into the closed-off area, and so the bomb went off not exactly where it was intended to. It went off at a security checkpoint. But as you point out, it certainly appears from what we know about what happened that this is a person, obviously a bad guy, but motivated by our presence in Somalia.
You know, another irony about all this is the authority for this. Probably, if they were asked, they don't get asked, and they don't have to explain why we're using military force and being involved. But it's all back to the authority to use military force after 9/11.
Yeah,
you know,
absolutely.
I don't think these people in Somalia had much to do with 9/11, but this is the whole thing. But you know what? It does bring up memories, though. In 1993, a short time after Clinton went into office, it was a disaster. A movie was even made, Black Hawk Down, and then then we left because it was such an embarrassing defeat. I mean, even though if you look at the statistics, our side killed a lot of people, but they were able to shoot down a couple Black Hawk helicopters, and this was a big deal. So it was quiescent, but now it's back in the news again, and it'll be coming back, but who knows which country it will be. Maybe it'll even be a country that'll be in the news. It wasn't even on that map, back to Libya again. We've been there, and maybe now that some of the Al-Qaeda and others who are leaving Syria, they travel, and I understand a few of them were allowed to leave, so they may back to Libya. So Africa could remain in the news for a while yet, and of course this is a reflection of a policy that we have, and you just wonder who gets excited about making these decisions and how high up the ranking goes, or how much local military people can make some of these decisions that can be very, very serious and dangerous.
Exactly, and the current justification for U.S. activity in Somalia is the Al-Shabaab group. And while they are a formal affiliate of Al-Qaeda, they've pledged their allegiance, whatever they do, essentially their goals are simply to set up an Islamic-based government in Somalia. They're not a global terrorist group. They don't have they don't plot, despite threats, they don't plot against the U.S. and Europe. They're focused on Somalia, which has been a pretty destabilized country since the overthrow of a strong leader that they had, Barre, a couple of decades ago. So this is a long, ongoing struggle. Al-Shabaab is part of this struggle, but it is contained in Africa. But it does give justification, according to Washington, for us to put, I think, at least 1,000 troops in there.
But in a way, their activities are more similar to the Taliban. The Taliban, just trying to maintain order and control in Afghanistan.
Their own country, yeah.
And they're not going out. And this is the same case here. But for our justification, if we say Al-Qaeda, people get stirred up. And I don't know how the American people would react if you went out on the street. Most people wouldn't know where it is and what's going on and wouldn't care that much. But maybe they would just say, well, they're bad people. We gotta kill them, because that's part of radical Islam, and these has to be they have to be radicals. Look at what they just did. They dropped this terrible bomb, but they wouldn't ask the other questions. What motivates them to do this?
Yeah, here's a guy who's motivated to kill this many people. Himself be killed if that's the case. And it's over something that the U.S. forces were doing there. Now, we know that right now they don't necessarily target the U.S. and Europe. They don't have that kind of global reach. It's out of their possibility. However, how many more attacks on farming villages like this are going to radicalize and motivate them to become more? So we're actually creating circumstances by being involved where we don't belong. We're creating circumstances where we actually could be subject to attack. That makes no sense.
And Robert Pape's book about suicide terrorism makes the point that the strongest motivation is to get rid of foreign control and foreign invaders in their country. So even though we don't know how many we have there, their interpretation may well be that we being there was a strong motivation for what happened here this last week.
And propping up a government that they hate, that we back. But the other issue, and it's an important one, is President Trump's response. And a lot of that is tied up in this, and he's obviously the blame doesn't fall squarely on his shoulders. It goes back administration. Obviously, the U.S. getting involved, but President Trump has done a few things that I think are potentially making things worse and potentially making things more dangerous for us here at home. First of all, he's given a lot greater latitude to local field commanders to call in airstrikes. And they may not have the full picture. They're on the ground. They may be influenced by local tribal leaders who have a beef with the next community. This is what happened in Afghanistan a lot. But he's given them blanket. I'm going to trust these guys on the ground. That produces greater civilian casualties. We've already seen in Afghanistan, civilian casualties are up 67% in the first half of 17 as opposed to the last half of 16. And Trump has named Somalia a zone of active hostilities. That means we can go there whenever we want, no reason for Congress to get involved. And now with this bombing, which was probably blowback for our involvement in the first place, he's widely expected to get us much more involved.
Right.
So round and round we go.
You know, one of the internationalist competitors is China right now. They want to be a powerful force. And they're involved in some degree in Africa, occasionally with some military, but for the most part, they spend money by trying to get more control of the rare earth elements, which is really a big deal. But most people, including myself, we can't even pronounce most of these elements. But they're very, very significant. And the reports, even up now, says that China might have 95% control of these elements, but they haven't really used this as a weapon in the warfare that goes on, you know, the competitiveness with China. But so it looks to me like here we are, and we look at a map and see how much militarism that we have to impose ourselves. But they actually spend money there, investing and getting control of some of these companies that do this mining, as well as they do their own mining in their country. But these elements and natural resources are important. That's one of, you know, Trump's made the statement about, you know, there are a lot of natural resources in Afghanistan. They don't say, well, there's a lot of oil, but there's natural resources there. Who knows how much oil's there? But that's always a justification. They don't want to say, oh, we're going there to control the world's natural resources. But these rare elements are interesting. I think the contrast between us trying to achieve achieve and control our empire, we have to use up all this military operation and spend a lot of money, where the opposition is doing it a little bit differently.
And we always botch it. We come in big with the military. We're gonna take this over. We're gonna take your oil, and we never get it. Look what's happened in Syria and all these places where we're gonna take their stuff. It never works out very well. And Sudan is a great example. The Chinese had made deals with Sudan many years back with their oil, because South Sudan has a lot of oil. And so the U.S. got in there and used its military and its influence, split the two Sudans apart to try to cut China out of South Sudan. And the Chinese went and made a deal with the U.S. proxy South Sudan government. They got the oil anyway. So we're not very good. We're not even very good at an empire.
Yeah, right. And in some ways, that's not too bad of an idea, but we still never give up, because we still have a lot of wealth and we still have all the weapons, and people are intimidated by our power and our military and our aggressiveness. But someday that will change, and we might have to deal with the world in a different manner. And of course, I'd like to see that done voluntarily rather than doing it when we're, under duress, when we're having financial problems. But this can't be a good investment for us. I mean, in this narrow sense of us participating in a raid that kills 10 people, a couple kids, who's going to worry about this? So they ignore it. But then it escalates, and if there's a suicide bomber angry at foreigners being involved, which is one of the motivations, then they kill 300 people. And who knows what the next step will be. But right now, it doesn't look like policies will change. I think our policies so far in this administration against terrorism is much more aggressive. And most people say, well, that's good. We have to be more aggressive because these are bad people. But maybe that's only an incitement and a stimulus for more terrorists to present themselves. It motivates them to do it. So it's a losing battle. If the stronger we act, the more enemies we have, we're not going to solve our problems that way.
It's almost like a perpetual motion machine that benefits only the military-industrial complex and the think tanks. Oh. But we hammer interventionism on the show constantly. That's our theme, and that's what we're all about. But this, once again, shows the follies of interventionism. Why is the U.S. involved in Africa? Well, we haven't talked about it yet, but the U.S. lost 4 soldiers in Niger not long ago. It's terrible, these horrible terrorists, horrible Al-Qaeda. Well, why are we in Niger? What are we doing there? Well, it turns out we're actually backing up the French, who are having operations in Mali. Well, what's going on in Mali? Well, when the French conned the U.S. into overthrowing Libya in 2011, all the weapons and all the radical fighters went down through Mali and Niger and down southwest there. So you have all of these things that are created by an interventionism that we, of course, got to go back in and solve. So this is the folly of interventionism.
And I think the only thing that has changed from the times of the Vietnam War and Korea War is we don't use massive armies. We use proxy armies, and we use sneaky attacks. We use the CIA and special forces, but it's the same type of aggression and creates the same type of hatred toward us, and they have to retaliate in a similar manner. You know, they can't. They're not going to bring tanks in and combat it with tanks, and we're not likely to send our tanks. We sent helicopters into Mogadishu, but we probably learned our lesson there. But we're always going to use the sneak attack and CIA, overthrowing elections, control things that way, rather than the big armies, which is, you know, slightly better, but it still can present a problem that can always escalate. That's where the real problem is the escalation that we don't know about. Nobody last week was thinking about, you know, we better be careful. We could have retaliation about us participating in this raid where we killed 10 people, a couple kids. Nobody would know that. But tomorrow it might be someplace else, and we can be assured that they haven't given up on Libya. I think that the oil and other reasons, we're going to stay very much involved in Libya.
No question. And it costs a fortune. It makes us less safe. But I'm going to use my final word, if I may, Dr. Paul, to once again remind our viewers that you can help support the show, and you can get a little piece of history here. Dr. Paul's new book, The Revolution at 10 Years, looking back over where he's gone with his campaigns and where we're going. And it's very easy to get your signed, personalized copy. Make your $100 donation, tax-deductible donation to the Ron Paul Institute at the website there. Then drop us a line, book@ronpaulinstitute.org, and tell Dr. Paul who to sign it to, and we'll get it off to you right away. Through the month of August only, so act now.
And I want to thank the audience for tuning in today. I know for some this may seem like an esoteric issue to deal with that's occurring in Africa today, but it also is a good example of the creepiness and how our foreign policy gets involved every place. And nobody said, why are we doing this? What is the purpose? And we wanted to just point this out, that we are very much involved, and this Africa Command is relatively new, so we have accelerated our presence in Africa. You know, if we had to invade all those countries with armies like the fascists did during World War II, that would be much more noticeable. But taking over these countries and being involved in all these civil wars and elections going on and assassinations, it's every bit as damaging to us. And unfortunately, the hatred toward us not only escalates, it lingers for a long time. I want to thank everybody for tuning in today to the Liberty Report. Please come back soon.